Hello viewers, welcome to Prime Log Special Edition. I am Tata Kappada. I have a guest today. My guest is a researcher and analyst on African affairs, and he's lately known for loudly, boldly, and truly speaking on Ethiopian affairs, particularly on the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia and issues regarding the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. At a time when Western world, especially the United Nations, is failing the country. He is indeed a man who dedicated substantial effort in researching, writing, and telling the Ethiopian story often missed in international media. My guest today is Laurence Freeman. Welcome, Laurence.
Glad to be here, sir. Always welcome at Prime Media.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, it is. Talking here is always good.
Yeah, thank you. So despite U.S. government's warning for U.S. citizens not to come to Ethiopia,
Yes,
and to avoid traveling to Ethiopia,
yes,
you have been here for the last 11 days.
yes.
And some other Americans are also traveling to Ethiopia, between America and the US, Ethiopia.
Yes.
Where is this America warning and fear coming from?
Well, I knew that this was a form of psychological warfare. It's a form of warfare. It's like the warfare on the battle. It's just conducted differently. Sometimes in the intelligence field, we call it psyops. And I knew what they were saying was untrue. I knew that they were trying to create fear in and among the Ethiopian people so that they would weaken their morale and weaken their resolve for the fight. So I said to myself, where should I be in the world today? I should be in Ethiopia and Addis Ababa. And I have ignored the warnings. By the way, the warnings are continuing as of today. The U.S. Embassy foolishly tweets out that Americans should leave Ethiopia and they are willing to lend Americans money to buy the tickets. On one sense, this is amusing. On the other, it's disgusting because the United States is attacking through propaganda and other means a great city and a great people. And I told them they should cut it out.
Yeah, to this day,
Yes.
they say Addis is under siege.
Yes.
But the information we have is that the rebels are pushed back to their territories now.
Yes.
So where is this siege narrative come from and why is that?
Again, this propaganda has been going on for about 4 weeks. And as you said, the Ethiopian Defense Forces have liberated Dessie and Lalibela and other places to the north. That was what they used before to say, oh, the TPLF is close by, they're going to come to Addis. Now they're not even close by. And when I got here Sunday, I walked around, I went to restaurants, I immediately saw Addis is a very unique city in Africa. It's my favorite city. And Addis was being Addis, and nobody was out of fear and no one was running it for fear. The problem is you have a political faction in the West, and as part of the Biden administration of President Joe Biden, who want to weaken Ethiopia. They want to weaken its leadership. They want to derail it from the path it's taking. And they're using psychological warfare. There's a propaganda narrative that lies all the time about Ethiopia. And they want to get the people of Ethiopia so scared that they will not support the government. And they will turn on the government.
Their intention, we've been saying this before when we had that interview with you. Yes, their intention was weakening this country. But lately it seems that they're going for regime change or even destabilizing Ethiopia.
Correct. In fact, I think it was when I was on your show earlier this year, I told everybody that the purpose of this attack on Ethiopia was regime change. Nobody thought I was telling the truth then. Now, many, many people, in fact, I have great notoriety in the U.S. diaspora because I told everyone about regime change before they came to realize it. They want to move, they don't want to have this government operating independently of this, what I call political, economic oligarchy.
Yeah.
They don't want an independent Ethiopia charting its own course. Therefore, they want to change the leadership or they want to weaken the leadership. They are willing to even go so far as to destabilize Ethiopia. Could be a war, a larger war could emerge in East Africa as a result of what they're doing. And they would rather have war and chaos then lose control. I know this is a hard concept for people to understand, but that's how dedicated they are to their geopolitical doctrine of political economic control. And of course, the United States now is losing all influence in Africa, or especially in the Horn of Africa. Sudan is no longer under the control.
Yeah, we'll discuss a bit on that later on, but let us come to Lalibela. You mentioned Lalibela is liberated, and I know a special place Lalibela has in your heart.
Yes.
That's the place you cherish and love
Yes.
most, and it was liberated by Ethiopian Defense Forces. And during that time, you tweeted something.
Yes.
You went to Lalibela restaurant here in Addis, and you said you had an amazing time. And my question for you is, what was people's reaction to that? And also, if that has affected you, if that has maybe sent a signal that you are impartial in the ways you talk about Ethiopia.
Well, I went to Lalibela I was here in April. I was in Nigeria. On my way back from Nigeria, I stopped in Addis to see my friends. And the last 2 days, I just took off and went to Lalibela on my own, did a tour on my own. And it was an incredibly emotional, psychological, religious experience for me. I think I wrote at the time that it was one of the great experiences of my senior years, was to visit Lalibela, to see these churches, to see this religiosity going on. It was a profound experience for me. And I discussed that, I think, on your show at the time. And when the TPLF took Lalibela, I was very sad. And I just happened to be in a restaurant not far from my hotel when Lalibela was freed. So for me, that was great. I felt warm inside, and I felt very good inside.
So what did people say about that on the unit? People are commenting, and I saw some of the comments.
Yes, yeah, people, because I would encourage all Ethiopians to go to Lalibela. Now I understand that the airport is messed up from the TPLF, but all Ethiopians should go to Lalibela. And this is a great heritage for Ethiopia and for Africa. And people were very happy to hear that I was in Lalibela, and people were very happy that I expressed my support for the freedom of Lalibela. There were some students I helped out when I was up there, and they've been in constant contact with me, young students. I bought them a dictionary when I was there, and they were very upset.
Some people might say, why is Mr. Freeman express his feelings deep this much, and is he partial when it comes to the Ethiopian issue?
For me, as a person who's been involved in politics and philosophy and history and economics for over half a century, I see issues very clearly, more clearly than many other people do. When I saw that the sovereignty of Ethiopia was under attack by an ethnic group, I knew at that point what was going to happen. I knew that this was an attack on the nation state of Ethiopia, and that the nation state is a very important conception. It took several hundred years to develop the concept of the nation state. And once a nation is sovereign, then it has to defend itself against an attack, and especially an attack by an ethnicity, an ethnic group. For me, you can be a citizen of the Ethiopian nation, but you can only be a member of an ethnic group, and citizenship is higher level than being concerned about what particular group you belong to, because you're a citizen of a nation. A nation has a purpose. A nation has a function. A nation continues the development of its people from generation to generation. For me, it's inviolable, and therefore I always defend sovereignty throughout the world, but especially in Africa.
Thank you. Let me come to the next question for you. You frequently say that U.S. officials, including President Joe Biden, know little about Africa and Ethiopia in particular.
Yes.
As a result, their foreign policies are misguided and dangerous.
Yes.
In your opinion, did Ethiopia's conflict taught them any lesson? I say this because they are now overwhelmed by protesters across states in USA and also across African continent. Mm-hmm. People are saying Ethiopia is fighting an African war.
Yes.
With the imperial forces. And people are saying it's enough, no more. And some are saying even as you know, as in the days of Kwame Nkrumah, unite or perish. What is your take on that?
It's the problem you have is multi-layered because in the United States, we have shrunk in our level of vision for the world and our intelligence. People, in my contemporaries, people in the United States are less informed than we were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They know nothing about Africa. They know the headlines in the papers about Africa. When I teach courses in African history, people are very happy to hear a history of this continent because they know nothing about it. Our elected officials know nothing about it. I don't believe that President Joe Biden is giving any thought to Ethiopia at all. I mean, you have right now, the United States foreign policy is in the worst condition it's been in decades. I can't remember when it's been this bad. Given what's going on in the rest of the world, Joe Biden is handed a paper, a few paragraphs on it, and he's told by Anthony Blinken or maybe people in this national security or Samantha Power in USAID, and they said, this is what's going on. The TPLF is doing this. Ethiopia is carrying out genocide against the TPLF. We have to stop them. And they tell them go for sanctions, remove Ethiopia from AGOA, and they tell him what to do. He doesn't know really what's going on. Most congressmen and senators don't know what's going on. In Africa, there is a resurgence of a united African movement, you might call it the Pan-African movement, which Kwame Nkrumah had, and also Haile Selassie was involved in when they formed the Organization of African Unity in the headquarters here in May 25th, 1963. Africans are seeing Ethiopia standing up for its sovereignty. African Americans are seeing this. Some, not all. Some African Americans are doing the other side. And there is, I hate to call it a silver lining because war is so devastating, but there is a unity building up in Ethiopia among its citizens and a unity building up around Africa. However, that's not enough. We have to continue to attack this notion of regime change and to force the Biden administration to back off. We have to make it so costly for them to continue that they back off. I believe my dozen or more interviews I've done here has actually had an effect, but it's not sufficient. We have to be very thoughtful among the diaspora and the government in continuing to identify the danger that the Biden administration would commit if they continue this policy of regime change in Ethiopia.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman, obviously a lot has changed since we met last time, right?
Yeah, yes.
And Ethiopia is in a full-out war with TPLF and some other groups within Ethiopian territory. And also there is these cross-border problems in the northern part with Sudan.
Yes.
And of course, these are not the only battles Ethiopia is fighting at the moment. In your opinion, how many battles do you think Ethiopia is fighting now?
Well, there are many battlefronts. Obviously, the government is most concerned about the military battlefront. And given what the reports are from the front, it appears they're making headway in that. However, that's just one of many battlefronts. I think the area that the government needs to react more strongly to is the battlefront of psychological warfare. This has been used throughout hundreds of years of history because if you want to defeat an enemy, you weaken the morale and resolve of its people. You sow confusion. And that is another form of moving to remove a government leadership.
Yeah.
You have a propaganda war. The propaganda war can be very effective because you repeat over and over again. Like, for example, very early this year, when the Secretary of State of the United States, Anthony Blinken, came out with no justification. There was not a single U.S. government intelligence report, but there was a CNN report that there was genocide and ethnic cleansing going on in Tigray. Now, and again, there was no report. Nothing. I checked with my contacts in Washington. So we had our U.S. government acting on disinformation from a news agency, yet that is very significant because the the Western faction, the geopolitical faction, will use the claims of genocide and ethnic cleansing.
Do you think even that media disinformation is a coincidence?
No.
For me, not at all.
No, this is
It's
deliberate.
deliberate. It's deliberate.
CNN, the problem is most people think that news agencies in the West are independent truth seekers. They're all part of political factions. There are slight differences between the Washington Post and CNN and New York Times and BBC. They serve different intelligence agencies, but they're all controlled. And the idea is to come out with the narrative. We used to call it, when I was younger, the line. What is the line? And then every other news media repeats it. Now, when the U.S. government is relying on CNN for its misintelligence, that is an actual attack on my sovereignty, because I don't want my nation. I go to elections and I elect my congressman, my senator, my president. I don't want some news agency telling me what I should think. But that happens. And so the propaganda warfare is a major warfare that's being directed against Ethiopia, and I think the government could and should respond better. As you mentioned, the economic warfare. The fact that the U.S. government, to this day, has not come out with a statement of support for the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, that itself shows you how bad the West and the United States are, because here you have a dam for development. This will be the largest infusion of new energy in sub-Saharan Africa. And it'll make Ethiopia the second largest energy producer outside of South Africa. And there's no support for it. And there is support from the Trump administration for the Egyptian-Sudan encirclement of Ethiopia, claiming that the Nile waters will be restricted to them. And then, of course, you have the situation in Sudan recently, where some people were killed in this conflict that goes back to 1903, I believe. There are reports that this is being supported, that Sudan is being supported by others to do this. So there's a conscious effort on these fronts. And then, of course, President Biden is now threatened to remove Ethiopia from AGOA, which is another attack on the economy, because you have several hundred thousand women garment workers who are able to sell their products without a duty charge coming into the U.S. Now those people will be thrown into poverty. So Ethiopia, don't forget, Ethiopia's history is to economic growth. And
this is an American hypocrisy at its best.
Absolutely.
In one hand, you say you stand for equality, democracy, right, justice, and all that.
Right.
All that values American people cherish.
Right.
But in another, you threaten the very people who need your support.
Right.
It's a human rights issue. When you pull out, when you just remove Ethiopia from AGOA, you know who is going to be affected.
Poor people. Yeah, the poor women.
I don't think it's going to be a prime minister. Anyway. No. I don't think it's going to be war generals.
Right.
Obviously, it's the poor. So that is the West hypocrisy.
Correct.
Double standard. So we are witnessing what is happening to the American leaders of our time.
Well, that, for me, as an American, I was discussing with my wife this morning, this is very upsetting. My view is that the United States right now is in the greatest crisis of leadership we've been in many decades. We don't have, either in the Republican or Democrat Party, a political leader with a vision for the future of my country and a vision for developing the world. What's been taken over. Now, there is difference between Republicans and Democrats. So Trump had his problems, and I at a certain point, I had to oppose Trump because he was handling the COVID-19 pandemic so poorly. But I warned my Ethiopian friends who thought it would be better on the Biden. I said, not necessarily so. Biden represents a faction of the country, which we also saw with Obama, of liberal democracy. They say, we know democracy. We're going to impose democracy our way on the rest of the world. We are for human rights. We consider the human rights of people more important than anything else. And in fact, they're having a democracy summit the next few days.
Excluding some other countries.
But their view of democracy is not what this country was founded on. We were founded as a democratic republic on profound principles of the geniuses of my founding fathers. Human rights. What is a human right? A human right, first human right is the right to live. So if you're not supporting electricity Why doesn't any human right group, why doesn't the NGOs make electricity the most important human right? Feeding a population, food, why isn't that a human right? Transportation, why isn't that a human right? In other words, if you don't have these basic infrastructure foundation in your economy, your people die. I know for a fact that Africans all over the continent die every day for lack of electricity, suffer.
Yeah.
So therefore, the whole human rights is a fraud. The democracy is a fraud. And people have to realize that. And the United States, the fact the United States is imposing this. But you brought up the condition of the United States. Now we're going to threaten sanctions against Russia. We're boycotting the Chinese Olympics for no reason. We are now threatening sanctions against Iran. My great country, which I love, and I want to change its policies to the work with Ethiopia, all we do around the Western world is we punish people if they don't agree with us.
Unfortunately,
we're better than that.
They are supporting TPLF because you have wrote on this matter on the leaked
secret
Zoom, in which retired American diplomats
and officials
and diplomats were discussing a transitional government.
Yes.
This is a very group that destroys infrastructure in Ethiopia.
Correct.
Destroys airports, destroys schools, destroys, dismantles hospitals and every sort of infrastructure. Either the group they're working with, and the world has seen that. It's no more secret. America wants to bring TPLF back.
Yes.
This is a very group Ethiopian people have said no and removed from power.
Yes.
Now they are working against the Ethiopian public. Anyway, let's come to another point and we'll continue our discussion. So some say this Ethiopian conflict has sparked a new wave of resistance across Africa, even in the rest of the world, in some places.
In the U.S., you have very large, never more movements by the diaspora.
Sure. Especially the no move movement, I would say, is becoming a slogan of our time.
Yes.
In much of the global south at the same time. Some Chinese officials, people from Russia, activists and notable people across the world are joining the movement. Mm-hmm. The Chinese government has also announced Greenland, an initiative for African agricultural products to be exported to Chinese mm-hmm. market. Mm-hmm. I think this comes after Joe Biden ordered an executive order to expel Ethiopia out of AGOA. Mm-hmm. Now countries like China, Russia and India, of course Kenya too, were standing by Ethiopian side mm-hmm. In a serious meetings at the Security Council. Mm-hmm. By contrary, US, United Kingdom and EU countries are pushing for more economic sanctions and even military intervention in Ethiopia. And they want to punish Eritrea too.
Yes.
Is the world order changing? Maybe a new Cold War? What are we witnessing these days?
Well, we're stuck. Unfortunately, President Biden, who I didn't have high hopes for, but he's actually done much worse than I thought he would be. I'm very upset about my country. But he is being pulled by the old concept, which he supports, the old geopolitical Cold War concept. This is a view that goes back hundreds of years in geopolitical thinking, which I call a disease. And they believe that the world is fixed, it doesn't grow, it doesn't change, it doesn't develop, but it has to, anything that's going to happen in the world has to happen by us from the West controlling it. We have to control the politics, we have to have our democracy, we have to have our economic policy. And therefore, this geopolitical disease is insisting that there's no other country that should be allowed to usurp our role as number one. So this is the whole last 50, 60 years, I would say since the death of John F. Kennedy, we've been suffering from this. The Chinese have a totally different view. The Chinese say, no, we want to work with other countries. And the Belt and Road Initiative has already transformed the world. has and will never be stopped. It's been one of the most important interventions into Africa since the liberation of Africa. They have made investments, not always perfect, but they've made investments in energy plants, in railroads, in roads, in schools, in airports. If you took the Chinese out of Africa, Africa would be worse off. I notice people disagree with that, but they're wrong. There is no debt tractor policy. There's no asset seizure. None of this is true. China is playing a useful role. There is really no reason for the United States to attack China. We, my country and China, if we signed an agreement together, which is what I would advocate if I was running policy in the United States, we signed an agreement with China and we say, let us have a common mission for the next 20 years that we will build the infrastructure platforms across Africa. We need 1,000 gigawatts. That's 1 trillion watts. We need 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. We need thousands of new hospitals, thousands of new schools, thousands of new scientific training centers. We need fission energy across the continent of Africa. There is no inherent problem between the interest of China and the interest of the United States except geopolitics. If we were smart, we would look at China and say, okay, we don't want everything China's doing, that's fine, but what have they done that's useful? They brought 750 million people out of poverty. Africa has about 500 million people in poverty, and China could help. The United States could say, gee, how did they do that? Let's look at something they're doing. They're doing something right. They may do other things we don't agree with, but in economics, they've changed their economy. I'm a follower of Alexander Hamilton, and I believe that if we use the policies of Hamilton, which is the policies that built this country in the 1790s, we could change Africa. And my job is to get the United States away from regime change, which would be a disaster. I don't want Joe Biden have his legacy as regime change.
That would have saved the world from crisis.
Yes.
But do you think America will ever have such a stance on world development affairs?
As it is in your country, most countries, the country responds to its leadership. We've had great leaders in the United States, fantastic leaders. Many heroes I have. We've also had some very poor leaders. I believe the last leader we had as a president who had vision was John F. Kennedy, who did openly support the development of Africa and worked very closely with Kwame Nkrumah. We don't have those leadership in the Democratic Republican Party. We could bring the American population along if we had some leadership which had a vision not only for the United States, but a vision for the entire world. I want my country to work with Ethiopia. I'm upset that we're trying to destabilize a proud, independent, important nation. In an area of the East Africa, it's about 300 million people. This is very dangerous if we support regime change here. And I want my country to return to a policy where we help and work with other countries for the development of mankind, humankind. We're all human beings. We all have the same aspirations and dreams for our children and our grandchildren. Why don't we work together to realize that?
Or at least America should subscribe to the Chinese model of equal cooperation of equals, at least in posturing itself, at least. China is saying, with regard to Africa, it's a cooperation of equals.
Yes.
As you said it correctly, the U.S., in contrary, believes in old geopolitical narration where some are big, the rest are small. Right. So always there is this relationship of subjugation. Right. Okay, you either change a regime, you elect your leaders, not the people, and you do whatever you want, at any time, at any cost. You said even they don't care if millions die or perish. This immorality, this insanity of the US politicians is actually a problem our world is suffering these days. Coming to another question for you. You said recently that Abiy Ahmed is taking Ethiopia on an independent path. Mm-hmm. You said he's not leaving room for meddling. And you also don't think that Joe Biden wants his legacy to be a destabilized Ethiopia. And you said oligarch groups within the American government and agents of corporates are the ones pressing from behind. Whoever is from behind, anyway. Do you think it's possible to destabilize Ethiopia? Is that what the Ethiopian history teaches us? Is that what we are witnessing while history is in the making under our own eyes here in Ethiopia?
Well, that's going to be decided over the weeks and months ahead. What is the future of Ethiopia and what is the future of Africa? One of the things I think that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed recognized, and this is one of the things I recognized in him, is you cannot run a country based on regional ethnicity. It's the wrong policy. It was a compromise, but it's wrong and it has to be corrected. We have to have a stronger national identity for Ethiopia. And I like the fact that the Prosperity Party was not ethnic based. Human beings are not defined by their ethnicity. Human beings are defined by their God-given powers of creative mind. And we'll all have that capability. Therefore, I think the desire to have a united, non-ethnic leadership in Ethiopia is important. We have to continue the economic work. Don't forget, even under the TPLF leadership of Meles Zenawi, there was a conception of economic development. And the idea that Ethiopia had is we don't manage poverty, we eradicate poverty. And Ethiopia has reduced the number of people in poverty. We need more Djibouti, Addis Ababa railroads. We need more Grand Ethiopian Renaissance dams. We need more development in economic growth. This is something that Ethiopia has led for many years. That's very important. Now, the Prime Minister is committed to those policies. I'll tell you something very interesting. I think it was Monday night. I was in a bar with some friends, and we were watching the news, and they were giving the news of the liberation of several cities, including Desse, on the news. And my friends translated the speech from Amharic too, so I could understand it. And one of the things that the Prime Minister said is he said, this is not the only battlefield. This is not the final goal. The ultimate goal is the elimination of poverty. Well, now he said that on the battlefield in his fatigues. And I'm saying to myself, that's leadership. That's what we need. The ultimate goal is the elimination of poverty. And the fact that he could say that in the midst of a war reinforced for me that this has to be the direction that Ethiopia goes. Now, the fact that the United States wants to have secret meetings with the TPLF, wants to support the TPLF, tilt all the propaganda to the TPLF, this shows you how wrong the United States policy is. But there is, despite the victories on the battlefield, and I hope that the government understands this, don't think because you're winning on the battlefield, you're winning the war. Because as we discussed earlier, the war is fought on multiple fronts, which I know because I've been fighting this for years. You have the potential, as the government makes more success through the defense forces towards Mekele, one of the things you could look out for is the fact that the propaganda machines will rack themselves up and say, there's genocide in Tigray, there's genocide in Tigray, there's ethnic cleansing in Tigray, we have to intervene now. And this is called the responsibility to protect, a doctrine that was used to destroy Libya and the Sahel 10 years ago. They went after Gaddafi using this doctrine, which says we, the West, in all our knowledge and wisdom and power, we have the right to intervene into a nation when we deem that nation is not defending its own people, we have to go in and defend them. That's the doctrine. And they could use that against Ethiopia.
Where is that democracy they promised to the Libyan people?
Where is the Sahel?
Where is the Sahel now?
It's destroyed. Libya is a failed state.
Where is the democracy they promised to the Yemeni people?
Yes.
To the Syrians?
Yes.
Where is
Look at Iraq.
That better life they promised to the Iraqi people? If you remove Saddam Hussein, then you'll be okay.
And look
they are not okay.
Right.
For decades now.
And look at Afghanistan.
True.
We did nothing to help the nation. Now we pulled out, but we are not giving them any financial, economic support. We're holding their money and not giving it to them.
In a disgraceful manner, for that matter. America was like, it was disgraced when they pack and leave from Afghanistan. Now, after they leave, the Taliban has a lot of arms now. And they were even showing up in Kabul
Right.
on the street. They are armed with every sort of American weapons.
But look at the larger picture. Take the 20-year period from 2001 to 2021, 20 years, a generation. We overthrew Iraq. The people in Iraq have never recovered. How many hundreds of thousands of children are dead or living in poverty because of that? We went into Afghanistan, even though it had nothing to do with 9/11. Neither did Iraq. We went into Afghanistan. Then 20 years later, we pull out. We didn't do anything to help that nation. We tried to carry out regime change against Syria. Didn't work, but we destroyed the Syrian people. In 2011, just 10 years ago, on the advice of Samantha Power, we bombed Libya and assassinated Gaddafi. I've been in the Sahel. I've been in Mali. The place is destroyed. There is more active extreme violence going on in Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger, and northeast Nigeria than there was before. So we look at 20 years, a failure in geopolitics. Now they want to continue this to Ethiopia. Shame on them for wanting to carry this out after 20 years of failed policy.
But the good thing in Ethiopia, we don't believe any power could come here in and survive. That's our history. That's our legacy. That's the foundation upon which we stand in solidarity today to defend ourselves. But coming to history, we remember how they removed the visionary leaders of the first generation of African leaders.
That's correct.
Thomas Sankara,
Kwame Nkrumah.
Kwame Nkrumah,
Patrice
in Congo,
Lumumba.
Patrice Lumumba, and probably in Mozambique too. Wherever you go.
And they overthrew the first government in Nigeria, the first republic.
Everywhere in Africa,
Yeah.
and of course in the global south. Their history, the legacy of Western powers is a legacy of destruction.
Correct.
A legacy of subjugation. And they're manufacturing, such, stories, fake stories to spoil relations among countries, among people. And then they come as a savior.
Yep.
And even then, they never saved anyone.
Correct.
Never. Coming to another question for you, Mr. Freeman. In your assessment, what do you think the future holds for Ethiopia, given the depth of the crisis and also the amount of pressure coming from elsewhere, from different directions? And with reference to growing unity among the Ethiopian public because of this provocation, as well as the voices of solidarity we hear now from around the world. Where will you find Ethiopia after this crisis? What will be the history's remembrance of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed? What would be his legacy?
I think his legacy and the legacy of Ethiopia is going to depend on what we do after this conflict. Now, the conflict, we have to bring it under control, and that has to be happening as soon as we can. But we have to think beyond the conflict, current conflict. One is we have to build strong national institutions in Ethiopia. And we have to have a discussion, which will be a messy, contentious discussion, to win people over that a nation is not a collection of ethnic groups. So we're going to have discussions with Yoroma, with Amhara, with Tigray, and others. It'll be a long-term discussion, and which should lead to a change in the 1995 Constitution, which codifies regional ethnicity. We have to think about reconstruction. We want to bring the Tigrayan people together with the Afar and Amhara, but because of destruction in Tigray, we want to bring them back into the country, into the nation, as soon as possible. I'm reminded of what President Lincoln did, because he carried out a war that everybody told him he should negotiate. 750,000 Americans died in 4 years as a result of that war. But when the war was ended, Lincoln, I believe, was the second inaugural address since '65, said, now we move on with malice towards none and charity to all. We bring the South back in. And he had plans and wrote a reconstruction program for the South because the South was backward. Slaveocracy, agrarian-based, the North was more the product of the United States, a manufacturing society. He wanted to bring the South back into the North. He was assassinated. His followers did not follow his policy. To this day, I'm going to get myself in trouble with some of my Southern friends in the United States, but to this day, the South never fully recovered from the lack of being integrated. I don't want to see that mistake in Ethiopia. So we have to say now, if someone was asking my advice, I would say let's start discussing, or at least put out some ideas about a post-war period for Ethiopia. What will Reconstruction look like? Make the offer now to the Tigrayan people. Don't wait till the end of the war. Do it now. Say, look, we are, and Prime Minister Abiy has the intellectual capability of doing this, from what I can see. He could say to the Tigrayan people, we want to have you as a vibrant, important member of our country, of our nation state, and we want to help you. We're going to rebuild the roads. We're going to rebuild the housing. We're going to rebuild the water as soon as this war ends. Put it out now, what Ethiopia intends to do in the future. And that will also undercut with this propaganda machine that Ethiopia is committed to genocide. By the way, I didn't mention this before. The UN, who did come out with a report, did not claim that Ethiopia committed genocide, ethnic cleansing, rape as a weapon. They claimed there were atrocities, and there probably were. You're in a war, there's going to be atrocities. There's never been a war without atrocities. There's never been a war without collateral damage. But there was no claim by the United Nations of ethnic cleansing, genocide, rape as a weapon. Yet, that's what Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, did based on deliberate disinformation from CNN earlier this year.
Yeah.
Now, that's what my country is doing. I've got to change my country.
The Prime Minister always say we're good at wasting opportunities, and this time we shouldn't.
Correct.
Unfortunately, because of various circumstances, we found ourselves in this all-out war, and a lot of damage occurred. Again, this became an opportunity by itself, because as external forces are trying to meddle in Ethiopian internal affairs, the Ethiopian people stood together, firm.
Yep.
This is, again, another opportunity to seize. That's not the only thing. Africans are saying this is an African war. So we can capitalize on this and build a Pan-Africanism once again. This spirit of Pan-Africanism can flourish based on the things happening in Ethiopia now. Again, this takes a leadership that can see this opportunity clearly and work hard to seize that opportunity, because this might be our last option. Who knows?
Well, I would say two things to that. One, we can call this metaphorically the second battle of Adwa. We're fighting the second battle of Adwa right now. The battle of Adwa was, you may not, you knew the battle, but the entire Western world in Europe.
The Addis mayor, was
but
saying,
the entire European world was thrown into conniptions because, in their mind, a heathen bunch of savages defeated a colonial army. The Prime Minister of Italy resigned that week. All the Europeans were crazy about it. So this is the second battle of Adwa to defend the nation of Ethiopia. Two, you're right about the Pan-African spirit, but we have to do more than have a spirit. We have to concretize it. And that's what I'm saying. There are plans in the AU agenda for the integrated African railway network. That should be something we activate now. There are plans for energy development. There are other economic plans. So to make Pan-African work, we have to have a concrete plan to build infrastructure in Africa. If we don't do that, then we waste the opportunity.
Africa has a plan, and that plan is Agenda 2063.
Right.
That is too far.
Correct.
That is too far. And
right. That's
Africa
40 years
needs
from
to
now.
revisit its agenda, development agenda, unification agenda, whatever.
Yes.
Some are dreaming the United States of Africa. I asked you before how soon that is going to happen. You said maybe in 20, maybe a century after. But for me, The opportunity is next door.
If we
It's
take
knocking. It's knocking, and we should open our doors. And every Africans must be, alerted on what's going on. If Africa is broken this time, it will be beyond repair.
Well-
So for Africa, it's time.
correct, we have to take this moment
Sure.
and move towards the actual realization of eliminating poverty and hunger in Africa, which we could do. I know how to do it. We could do it with the right economic policy. Most people may not know this, but this vision for Africa has been around for a long time. You had a genius, a towering intellectual from Senegal, Cheikh Anta Diop. And he was an Egyptologist, he was an anthropologist, but he wrote a book on the Cultural Federation of Africa. And he's writing in the 1960s. And he says we should have nuclear energy plants in every African country. And he said within 20 years, which would have been the 1980s, every African country will have its own independent national economic grid. He wanted not just fission energy, he wanted fusion energy, which is even more advanced. He wanted scientific centers set up in Africa to train engineers and cadre of Africans to run these plants. He, Kwame Nkrumah, and others, they saw we needed manufacturing. We needed sovereign banking policies, not people swindling us, by the way, IMF and World Bank. This has all been around for over 60 years in Africa. Why don't we make a solemn commitment, you and I here on this station today, that we are going to do this for Africa finally after 60 years of suffering from neocolonialism?
The mayor of Addis Ababa, in one of her public address, said, if they ask us to choose between Agua and Adwa, you mentioned before, we'll definitely choose Adwa.
Of course.
That's our legacy.
Of course.
Agua is a support. It's charitable thing. And you can take your charity away, but not our dignity. And that was moving. Now, coming to this soaring relationship between US and Ethiopia, will the US and Ethiopia be able to reconcile their differences and restore their diplomatic ties, or remain antagonists for a long time, as in the case with Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and similar countries? Which one scenario do you think will prevail?
Of course, we can reconcile. Look, the relationship between Ethiopia and the United States goes back to 1900s. If I was Secretary of State for African Affairs, we'd have no problem. The United States is founded on great principles of development, especially Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, so many others. We used to believe in developing, helping other nations develop. We can do it again. There is no inherent conflict between Ethiopia and the United States. I love the United States, and I will work to change the United States policy. We have to correct it. But there's no reason that Ethiopia, which the Ethiopians still look to the United States, all Africans still look to the United States. Everywhere I go, no matter what the United States has done, people look up to the United States. Why doesn't the United States become the symbol of development that the Africans look to us for? So why don't we change ourselves in the United States and become the city on the hill that the rest of the world is looking toward and that Africa wants? And that's what I'm dedicated to doing.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. If you are asked to explain Ethiopia in a few words, what would be your answer?
It's a proud, great, ancient history to this country with wonderful people who want to unite with the United States and want to extend and expand their economic growth with the rest of the world. And we should recognize that and we should support them on that.
Thank you. I share that too. And to add on that, I believe Ethiopia is resilient, invincible. This is a country that survived so many difficulties and ups and downs.
True. The
But
1935.
survived to tell the history of not only itself, but the rest of the world. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. You are so kind to us, and we really appreciate your time, your professional dedication, your integrity in really uncovering the story of Africans which is often missed in international media. And I also appreciate your profound courage for speaking the Ethiopian truth for the rest of the world at this difficult time. And thank you indeed. And with this, if you don't have anything to add, we'll close our session.
No, it's my pleasure to be in Ethiopia. And as I said at the beginning of the show, there's no place I'd rather be in the world than in Addis Ababa.
Thank you. Our esteemed viewers, this is all we have for you today. Until we meet next time, bye-bye. Stay tuned with other programs of Prime Media.